Shalom and welcome to the 70 Facebooks of the Torah. I'm Jesse Olitsky, rabbinic intern at the Orangetown Jewish Center, and today we finish up the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, with the double parshiot of Parshat Vayakhel and Pekudei. As you know, throughout the end of the book of Exodus, we've had the instructions listed for us time and time again of how to build the tabernacle. But finally today, we build it. We read together two parshiot that Bezalel, the artist in residence, that God chooses over everybody else to build a tabernacle, builds this Mishkan, this traveling sanctuary in the desert. And he constructs every single part. When he's complete, Moses puts the tabernacle together, assembles it, and finally, at the end of the book of Exodus, we learn that God resides within the tabernacle. We read in chapter 40, verses 33 through 35, that when Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, and the presence of the Lord, Kavod Adonai, filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the Mishkan, filled the tabernacle. God's glory, Kavod Adonai, entered and filled the whole tabernacle. It really is a beautiful image. The commentator Ramban, Nachmanides, says that God's cloud of glory covered the Mishkan on its sides until the tabernacle was completely hidden and only God's presence was evident. And while the cloud encompassed the outside of the Mishkan, God filled its interior. Yet what does this mean? That God's presence filled the tabernacle. The commentator Sforno suggests that God revealed God's self within the Mishkan, in all aspects and all parts of the Mishkan. But God's presence was limited to only the Mishkan and not outside of it. It's a very powerful understanding that God was in the Mishkan, but God was the Mishkan. That every aspect of the Mishkan, we could find God in it. In these material items that we often overlook and don't see God in, God was there and God was present. Yet, Sforno says that God was only at the Mishkan when the Kavod Adonai, when the presence of God was there and nowhere else. As children, we learn that God is everywhere. God isn't just up there, but God is all around us. Furthermore, God disappears for many chapters. Last week, in Parshat Kitisa, we read of the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf story. God gets upset with the Jewish people, with the Israelites. And God doesn't reappear again until the end of the book of Exodus, when we're told that the Kavod Adonai, God's presence, resides in the Mishkan. Are we to assume that God left us? That God gave up on us because God was upset? Where did God go? Does God pull away when we're wicked, but only remain when we follow God's mitzvot, God's ways? That's only when God embraces us? I don't buy it. God never left us. It's just that we stopped looking. In the Torah, for many chapters after the golden calf experience, the Israelites stopped looking, and so too in our lives, we stop looking. Abraham Joshua Heschel of blessed memory used to say that on his way to the Jewish Theological Seminary every morning where he would teach, he would see the trees putting on tefillin. The trees putting on tefillin. When he would ask his students if they saw the same thing, they would think that he had lost it a little bit. How could the trees put on tefillin? But what he meant is just as the tefillin is a sign that God is present, so too are the trees. The trees remind us that God is present, remind us that the Kavod Adonai, the presence of the Lord, resides in the trees and in everything all around us. Rabbi Heschel was reminding people that too often we stop looking for God's presence. For God is truly everywhere. And God's presence wasn't limited to the Mishkan. Rather, God's presence, I believe, radiated from the Mishkan throughout the entire world for all of us to embrace. When we had the Mishkan present, it was easier to look and easier to find God there. Sometimes it's much harder, but always we should continue to look. Because when we look, when we remove the blinders from our eyes, then we'll find God. What do you think happened? Did God simply disappear from the Golden Calf account until now? Until the Mishkan was completed? Or do you think God was there all the time and the Israelites simply didn't look, so didn't find God? Do you think God is everywhere and God is involved in everything? Or only in specific places, holier places, like the Mishkan or like our synagogue and in the sanctuary where we pray? And finally, how do you strive to find God in those things that we too often consider mundane and ordinary? How do you always look so that you recognize that the Kavod Adonai, the presence of the Lord, the presence of God, is in everything? I look forward to discussing this together. It's traditional that when we conclude a book of the Torah, we say the words chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. So as we conclude our studying of the book of Exodus and the book of Shemot together, so too we say, strength, strength, and may we be strengthened. May we be strengthened as we continue to look for God in everything and in all that we do.